Alright, welcome back, Sebastian here. So with a couple of days left in 2025 and indeed in seasons where we've had, calendar years I should say, where we've had the ground effect era, of course the one that started in 2022 and just finished up this past year, 2025. So today I thought I would start a series looking at performance throughout this ground effect era. So for today we're going to be looking at teams. Then we have two videos looking at the drivers. That video is basically going to be split into two parts, simply because it would be too long if I did those separately, or if I did those together, it'd be probably even longer than the one I did a week ago or so, the one that was about an hour and 15 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in order, reverse order of cumulative points during this ground effect era. So starting out with number one, first we're going to look at qualifying stats. Average minimum, and so Sauber had the lowest points total, not a surprise, and that's why we're talking about them first. But first, for the qualifying stats, average pole gap over this period, 1.461 seconds, which actually ranks 9th out of the 10 teams. When you look at average minimum starting position, their average was 11.91, which ranks 10th at last. And I'm going to be using average minimum starting position to look at the best season and worst season, because if you go by pole gap for best season, a lot of the seasons are, well, for a lot of the teams it's going to be this past season, and for worst season a lot of them it's going to be 2022, and that's just because of how the field has bunched together a lot through the course of the regulation. So I'm using this stat instead of pole gap for looking at best and worst individual season. So best individual season qualifying was 2022, a average minimum starting position of 9.82, which ranked 7th out of the 10 teams that year. The worst season, 2024, not a surprise. They really bottomed out, started this regulation cycle well, and then just kind of got worse over 3 years, and led to big, massive overhauls in the staff, in the upper management staff of the Sauber team. As I think Audi kind of recognized, this wasn't going to cut it in terms of setting the groundwork for their F1 debut, which is of course coming next year. That season, 2024 average minimum starting position 13.96, ranked dead last. Now when we look at points, the 145 points total Sauber got, which ranks dead last, like I mentioned before. Their best season in terms of points was 2025, this past season, where they got 70, and they finished 9th in the Constructors with that total. They did technically finish 6th in the Constructors with the season where they got 55 points, but just to keep things simple, I'm going by just pure season based on points. I know there's more sprints now, there's a couple more races, but doesn't affect the totals too much, I would say. Now, worst season, again, just like with qualifying, their worst season was 2024. Only picked up 4 points, and that was courtesy of an 8th place finish by Zhou at the 2024 Qatar Grand Prix, and of course finished at last in the Constructors that year. No wins during this era, not a surprise. There's only 4 teams that won races, so they're technically tied for 5th with all the other teams that didn't score a win. Podiums, they did get 1 win, their first podium in quite a long time, and that was of course courtesy of Nico Hülkenberg at the British Grand Prix this past year, and that ties them with for 8th with I believe one other team. Now, moving on to the 9th place team in terms of cumulative points is Haas. Their average average pole gap, I should say, during this period, 1.273 seconds, which ranks 7th on the 10 field teams. Average minimum starting position over this time period, 10.43, which ranks 8th. And when you look at best season and worst season for average minimum starting position, actually you see that basically Sauber or Haas was very, very consistent in terms of where they were qualifying. So the best season was actually 2023, 9.91 was their average minimum starting position, which ranks 7th on the grid. Worst was this past year, 11.67, which is tied for 9th with Alpine. So very, very small range. They never really got better than what I would say is a low midfield team in terms of their qualifying performance. Now, ironically, their 2023 season, which was their best season in qualifying, was actually their worst year when it comes to points. So they got 186 points total during these 4 years, and that ranks 9th. Their best season was this past season, 2025, 79 points total, and that is 8th. And that was good enough for 8th in the Constructors. Now, their worst season was 2023, the one that was ironically their best season in qualifying, only got 12 points. And they finished dead last in the Constructors that year. And little did we know that season. That season in particular, we thought, 12 points for a last place team in the constructors. That's, crazy. That's very, very good. We're never going to see that anytime soon. Of course, that tally was basically doubled by Alpine this past year, pretty much all entirely because of Pierre Gasly. In fact, entirely because of Pierre Gasly, as he got all of the team's points. Now, no wins, so again, not a big surprise there, and also no podiums. The one team in this era that did not get a single podium, so perhaps a little bit disappointing for Haas not to get a podium. They, of course, have never gone a podium in their entire history in F1, so maybe that will change with the new regulations. Almost certainly not going to be 2026, but maybe towards the end of the regulations, 2029 or so, Haas, maybe they can, if they get a lucky race, they might be able to get their first podium in F1. Now, for Williams, they are the team that are in 8th in terms of points, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But average pole gap 1.48, which does rank dead last. Now, part of the reason why the pole gap is not entirely representative is that the first season, some of the average pole gaps are absolutely massive, especially compared to what we saw this past season. And so the teams that got it really wrong in qualifying for the first start of the regulations, their averages are really weighed down, and we'll see that with one other team. But Williams was another one of those teams. Again, they definitely started this regulation cycle off really poorly. Average minimum starting position, though, isn't much better, 11.51, which ranks 9th overall. Now, it's easy to forget that, given they had such a good 2025, that, the first 3 years of this regulation set, Williams have been pretty weak. But yes, that 2025 average minimum starting position of 8.54, and that ranks 6. That was 6 overall, so actually a little bit worse than Racing Bulls by the end of the season. Worst 2022 by a mile, 14.5 that season. That ranked dead last. So you can see about 6 positions improvement from 2022 to 2025. So if we're looking at just in terms of pure improvement in terms of starting position, Williams would have that best record on the grid. Now, in terms of race results, they scored 190 points during this regulation cycle. That's 8th. Their best season, of course, was this past season, 2025, where they scored about 60 to 70% of their points during this regulation cycle just this year. 137 points put them 5th in the constructors, and their worst season was the first season, 2022, where they only got 8 points and they came 10th in the constructors. No wins, of course, but they did get 2 podiums, both of those this year courtesy of Carlos Sainz, and that puts them 7th on the leaderboard in this regulation cycle. Now, moving up to the team that was 7th, I believe, in terms of points, and that is Racing Bulls. They, of course, started this regulation cycle as AlphaTauri. There was that name for 2 years, and then they changed their name to RB, and then no one liked that name, so they were kind of forced to change their name back to, well, not just change it back, but basically change from the RB that they had to the full-on Racing Bulls, which is what everyone knew what they were supposed to be called. Now, average pole gap during this time, 1.267 seconds, ranks 6. Their average minimum starting position, 9.55, ranks 7th on the 10 teams. So a little bit worse in terms of starting position than the pole gap. Their best season in terms of qualifying, average minimum starting position of 7.83 this past year, 2025. That actually ranked 5th on the 10 teams. Now, their worst season qualifying was 2023, average minimum starting position of 11.64, where they ranked 9th. And they were AlphaTauri at the time, but the first half of that season was especially poor. Had the worst car by a decent margin. Did get a little bit better in the second half of the season, but overall, the total for the whole season was still quite bad. Now, for points, 198 points total, which ranks 8th. Their best season was 2025, like many of the other lower midfield teams, where they got 92 points, which ranked, that's a mistake, it shouldn't say 5th, it should say 6th here. So again, that's my bad there, that should be a 6th place. Worst, 2023, where they got 25 points. Worst 2023, we got 25 points, which ranked 8th in the constructors. So even their worst season, still 8th in the constructors is not terrible. No wins to this regulation cycle, of course, and then podiums. One solitary podium courtesy of Isaac Hadjar at the Dutch Grand Prix this past season. Now moving on to the next team, and that is Alpine. Now Alpine have been all over the place when it comes to results during this regulation cycle. Kind of the opposite of Williams, and of course one other team that we'll talk about in a bit. Alpine have basically gotten worse every single year. during this regulation set, but they did start the regulations off very well, which is why their average pole gap is not too bad. It's 1.086 seconds, which ranks 5th. Their average minimum starting position over this time period, 9.12, ranks 6th. Their best season, 2022, where they had an average minimum starting position of 6.68, which was good enough for 5th overall. The worst season, of course, this past season, 2025, 11.67, which tied for 9th with Haas, I do believe. Now, moving on to their points results. Again, not a great story here, especially if you're looking for positive improvement over the course of a regulation cycle. But, if some teams improve, other teams generally have to get worse. And so for Alpine, 380 points over this period, which is generally more than you would think, given how bad they've been, especially this past season. But yeah, 380 points, ranked 6th overall. Their best season, 2022, first year, 173 points and 4th in the constructors. Helped a little bit by Ricciardo really struggling in McLaren, but nonetheless, they've had a pretty good car that year. The worst season, definitely 2025, 22 points total, and that was 10th in the constructors. And yes, basically being they now have the record of having being the best worst placed team in the Constructors' Championship probably in F1 history, as they of course beat the Haas record from 2023. Now for wins, no wins of course, and podiums, they did get 4 podiums over this time period, 2 courtesy of Ocon and 2 courtesy of Gasly, which puts them in 6th. So honestly not terrible in that respect, and that is more podiums than they got, I believe, prior to Actually, I'd have to think about this. Ocon got 1 podium, 2021. Alonso got another. Ricciardo got 2 in 2020. Actually, no. So basically, between 2020 and 2021, I think Renault/Alpine did get more podiums. So again, 5 over 2 years is definitely better than 4 over 4 years. But nonetheless, again, it is comparable with what they did prior to the ground effect era. So moving up to 5th, and probably the most bizarre team, is Aston Martin. Average pole gap of 1.302 seconds, really pulled down by a really abysmal qualifying performance in 2022, which we'll get to in a bit. They ranked 8th overall, which is a pretty big difference from their average minimum starting position over this period, which was 8.57, which ranks 5th. Their best season qualifying, of course, 2023, an average of, not an average, but an average of 5.59. Which ranked 5th overall, a little bit worse than the McLarens, who they were kind of, doing the opposite of. Started strong, finished poorly. McLaren, of course, started poorly and then finished strong. Worst season, 11.77, which was 2022, and they were 9th in the constructors that year. So second worst qualifier, only better than Williams that first year. Now, in terms of points, pretty similar story to qualifying. They scored 518 points during this period, more than half of which were in 2023, with 280 points, which was again 5th. Probably should have been 4th, but Stroll had a really poor year, and finished with I think like 13 or 14 points worse than Piastri in his rookie season, what was probably a slightly worse car. Now, worst season, 2022, they only got 55 points. They were tied for 6th. Technically, they finished 7th. Of course, when you're just looking at the raw points total, technically you can do the tie for category. You don't have to do count back. For wins, no wins. Again, I think they were a little bit unfortunate / unlucky to not get a win during the first half of 2023. But when your opponent is Max Verstappen, it's very, very hard to get wins. But Alonso did try his best on a number of occasions. 8 podiums during this period, which is 5th. And again, all of those wins courtesy of Alonso, and all those podiums, or not wins, all those podiums courtesy of Alonso, and all of them coming in 2023. Now moving over to the 4th place team in terms of points, but interestingly, they're 3rd in terms of all of these values on the qualifying side of the board, so a little bit of a coincidence there. Average pole gap 0.518 seconds, ranks 3rd overall. Average minimum starting position during this time 3.7, which was 3rd. And best season 2023, their average minimum starting position was 3.55, which ranked 3rd overall that year, and their worst season was 2022, 3.86, which also ranked 3rd. Mercedes were in a really strange position where they've never really had a car that's strong enough to challenge for a championship, but they have had a car that's definitely been clear of the midfield pretty much every season. There were a couple poor races early in 2022, and then a couple just bogey tracks, over the past 4 years, which they've been maybe in the midfield, at the front of the midfield at points. But all in all, they've generally been a front running car, and they've definitely been a very strong car. When you look at the grid overall, but still much worse than the standards that Mercedes kind of set for themselves in the early part of the turbo hybrid era. Now, looking at race results, points overall, they came fourth with 1,861. That's kind of a result of the fact that they were kind of in this mushy middle where they were never great, but they were never, terrible either. And so the averages, of course, you'd prefer to have one season of having the absolutely dominant car, which is what happened to the team in third overall. But really interestingly, their best season in terms of points was 2022. 515 points, and that put them third in the constructors. Their worst season in terms of points was 2023. They had 409 points, but that put them second in the constructors. So worst season gave them a better finish in terms of constructors championship, which is a bit of an odd one there, but it does kind of highlight the structural differences between the two seasons. 2022, you still had a very clearly defined top three of Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, but 2023 you basically had Red Bull in a league of their own the whole season, and then you had Aston, McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes kind of competitive with each other at different points of the season. They were all taking points off each other, and that's kind of how you end up with being second in the constructors with your worst points tally of that regulation era. Now, for wins, they do come last out of the teams that did get wins. They only got 7 wins. Most of those courtesy of George Russell. Of course, Hamilton did get a couple of those. In terms of podiums, 46 total, and again, that ranks 4th. Now, moving on to the team that was 3rd overall in terms of points, your most recent double constructors champions, and of course, your most recent drivers championship winners as well, courtesy of Lando Norris. But for McLaren, average pole gap really hurt by 2022 and the first part of 2023. Average pole gap of 0.583 seconds, which ranks 4th. Average minimum starting position 3.73, which again ranks 4th. Their best season, of course, this past season, 2025, where they had an average minimum starting position of 1.5, which again was class leading. Their worst season, not a surprise, 2022, 6.5, which ranked 4th. So you can see improvement of 5 positions, which is second biggest, and bested only by Williams. But of course, most, I think, of the teams would tell you that it's much easier to go from back of the midfield to the front of the midfield than it is to go from midfield to from that equivalent position in the front of the midfield to constructors champion. So very, very impressive what McLaren was able to achieve in this regulation cycle, in my opinion. Now, in terms of race results, 1,960 points total, which ranks 3rd. The best season, of course, this past season, 833 points, won the Constructors' Championship with, I think, 5 or 6 races to go. Worst season, not a surprise, 2022, so basically mirrors the qualifying results. 159 points, which put them 5th in the Constructors. Now, for wins, they do finish 2nd, and so do they in terms of podiums. So 20 wins total during this period, and 65 podiums. And again, that's kind of what I was trying to explain, where, in terms of wins and podiums, you're better off having, a really dominant car for even 1 or 2 seasons and then being not very good for the other 2 seasons, than having, kind of a consistently good but not terrible, good, not great, but not terrible car, which is kind of where Mercedes found themselves in this time period. Now, interestingly, the team that finished second in terms of points was Ferrari. Average pole gap 0.305 seconds, which ranks 2nd. Average minimum starting position 2.76, again ranks 2nd. Unfortunately, a bit like the opposite of McLaren, their best season in terms of qualifying was 2022, 1.59, which put them 1st and actually slightly better than Red Bull that season. Now, for 2020, worst season, it was 2025 by a fair margin. 4.17 was their average there, which put them 4th on the grid. Well behind the other 3 teams, but still comfortably ahead of Racing Bulls and Williams, who were kind of leading that second group. Now, in terms of race results, similar situation, especially in terms of the worst category, but the best category is actually a little bit different. So for points, 2,010 total over this period, so that's second, a little bit ahead of McLaren. Their best season in terms of points was actually 2024, not 2022. 652 points total, which put them second. Of course, they were in that Constructors' Championship battle right until the very end of the season. So really good job there by Ferrari, just very, very close, but they had a bit of a wobble towards the early part of the summer, and that really put them on the back foot and prevented them probably from winning the Constructors, but also from putting up a serious challenge in the Drivers' Championship. Now, in terms of wins and podiums, they ranked third in both categories, 10 wins and 58 podiums total. So a little bit better than Mercedes. I think most people would agree they've generally, on average, been a little bit better than Mercedes over this time period. They've been better than Red Bull at points during this time period, but for the most part, they've never really had a class-leading car except for arguably the first third of 2022, and so that makes it really, really hard to compete for either a Drivers' or Constructors' Championship. Now, of course, number one, not a big surprise. I think anyone would have been able to figure this out with this kind of video when you're looking at the whole era as a whole. And so for average pole gap, 0.165 seconds. Again, first, I don't think that's a big surprise. Average minimum starting position, 2.16, also first. Best season, not a surprise here, 1.68, which ranks first. But a bit surprisingly, it is lower than McLaren's best season. This is partially helped by McLaren having two very, very competitive drivers. And again, with this stat plus the average minimum finishing position stat, it does minimize the effect of underperformance by a number two driver, but that effect is still a little bit there. And also I think Red Bull took a number of engine penalties, which also would have affected this stat as well in 2023. Worst season, not a big surprise, 2025, 2.79, which ranks second overall, but still their worst season does rank very, very well in terms of qualifying results. Now, in terms of points, 2,659, so about 650 more than the second place team. That's obviously first. The best season was, of course, their dominant 2023 season, 860 points. And their worst season was 2025, this past season, 451 points, and they finished third in the Constructors, partially due to severe underperformance from Yuki Tsunoda. If they had, I think, average performance out of that second Red Bull, they probably would have gotten enough points to get second in the Constructors, of course, with Antonelli having his struggles as well during parts of the season, only picking up 150 points total. Now, wins and podiums, first in both categories, not a big surprise. 55 wins for Red Bull, most of those courtesy of Max Verstappen, of course, as well as 91 podiums as well, which is, I think there was 92 podiums, 92 races in this era. So again, multiplied by 2, that's 184. So again, they got almost half of the podiums they could have. And again, which does seem a little bit low. I think if you were to compare that to Mercedes, during the 2014 to 16, or even going all the way to 2021, Mercedes probably had a much better hit rate in terms of getting podiums. And again, part of that's just a little bit of underperformance on the part of Perez. I guess we can throw Lawson in there as well, even though he only did two races, and again Tsunoda. So again, a little bit low in terms of podiums, lower than you would expect for sure. But still, the overall numbers are very, very good, and I think without a doubt, Red Bull were the best team overall during this era. But of course, when you have Max Verstappen, that definitely makes things much easier as well. So that's all for this video, kind of analyzing and looking at team performance during the ground effect era from 2022 to 2025. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.